All right, welcome back, Honors. All right, it's good to see you again. I know it's only been about 5 seconds, but I'm trying to get this flip up as soon as possible going into your weekend, right? What did I just get? Oh, all right, anyway, now, so we left off in class talking about Napoleon himself, right? We talked about how he's actually not French at all. He's actually Corsican. We talked about his relationship with his parents. We talked about like his moving up through the French ranks, right? Now, we never really took 2 seconds, and I also got asked a very, very all-important question by one of you marvelous honors young women, is that how was Napoleon able to move up in the French military so quickly? Well, to answer that question, you got to understand that during the French Revolution, a lot of these massive figures of the French military, they're generals, captains, lieutenants, all these very, very prestigious figures, are going to be replaced by figures loyal to the revolution because a lot of these old officers supported the king and they fled, right? They fled during the revolution, so there was kind of like room for advancement, if you will, right? And Napoleon graduated from military school at the age of 16, became a general by the age of 26, and is the emperor of France by the age of 30, right? Like, so he moved up through the ranks very, very quickly, right? Now, Napoleon is going to prove this clout in the military, of course, because he was a general or a captain and a general of the artillery, and he's going to win major battles against the Austrians and the Prussians during the War of the First Coalition, and then he's also going to win an all-important battle when the Brits are actually trading with a little southern French town, right? And I believe it was the Battle of Toulon or Toulon. All right, let me look it up really quick. Napoleon Battle of Toulon. Yeah, Toulon. Now, there was a small French city in the south of France called Toulon, Toulon, that those people had been independently trading with the Brits and the French Revolution government, and Napoleon saw this as Britain overstepping its bounds, right? That Britain was throwing its clout around because they were the strongest country in all of Europe, and they had the biggest navy, and they thought they were better than everybody else, and they were trading with this little French southern town. And the French revolutionary government and the director was just not having that, right? So they were like, you need to go down there, and you need to show those men how to use artillery, you need to bombard the British, and you need to push them out, right? And Napoleon does this. He goes down, and he makes a name for himself, and he gets promoted up to general after he actually does this, and he pushes the Brits out. The main reason why he could push the British out is because they didn't have a certain guy there at a certain time. But it's the only time that Napoleon would ever have a massive victory in his early phases of his career against the British, right? So now he quickly becomes a general, and he also saves the Directory, right? The post-revolution Directory government from people called royalists, and also even from sans-culottes members themselves, right? So the Directory was extremely weak and very ineffective, right? Very, very ineffective, extremely weak. So they kind of needed to be saved in more instances than one. One time, the Tuileries was where they were meeting, and they were being attacked by a mob of sans-culottes, and Napoleon had shots fired into this entire crowd of people. Another time, the Directory was attacked by royalist troops, and Napoleon defeated them as well. So he earns the trust of the Directory very, very quickly. Now, his biggest goal as a young man was always beating Great Britain. He always wanted to defeat Britain, right? He was never okay with the fact that going into following the War of the First Coalition, when he crossed over into Italy and destroyed loyal Austrian troops, and he destroyed Prussian troops, and he helped push them all the way out and winning this war that no one saw France ever winning. He was like, I'm still not okay with the fact that Britain is close by. And the reason why they were close by is because they were down in Egypt, right? So if you take a look at this map real quick, you got Britain right here, France is right here, the Mediterranean Sea, Egypt, and India. Those are our 4 important areas that we're talking about when we're referring to this map, all right? So what the British would oftentimes do is they would actually sail their Royal Navy all the way down, go into the Mediterranean through the south of Spain. That's why they were messing around with this Toulon city down here in the south of France when Napoleon went and bombarded them and pushed them out. They would go all the way through the Mediterranean Sea, dock right here in Egypt, cross over going through this Suez area right here into the Red Sea, pop out, and then go over to India, cutting the trip in half that would have actually taken a really long time to go all the way around Africa, right? So Napoleon comes up with a brilliant idea. He's like, I'm going to go to Egypt, and I'm going to cut them off, and I'm going to try and cut Britain where it hurts, in their wallet, right? Why their wallet, you ask? Because Britain was still a major trading empire in all of Europe during this time period, and probably the most prolific trading empire in all of Europe during this time period, and they used Egypt as the middle ground area to get to India, which was what known as their crown jewel, right? Their jewel and their cap that they made all of their money off of, right? So, not all of it, but a lot of it, right? Because they used India as a market to sell their cotton textiles, and they also used the goods coming out of India to make an excessive amount of money to fund their Royal Navy, right? Now, the Egyptian campaign had massive victories for Napoleon. Do not get this wrong. He did not go down there and get defeated out the gate, but he actually did have massive victories in Syria, in areas in like what you would now consider the Middle East, and then going into the Suez Basin, right? He actually had massive victories there as well. He even had scientific studies done while he was there, and it was a very, very, very good voyage. Even while he was there, they discovered this bad boy, the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone is a very, very famous artifact from Egypt discovered by Napoleon and his troops, where the same passage is written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, simplified Egyptian, and then Greek at the bottom. And the Rosetta Stone would be used to translate ancient Egyptian into a language that people could understand, right? So for the very first time, ancient Egyptian was now able to be read, right, by historical communities, and this thing was discovered on Napoleon's voyages, right? There's also an old myth that like one of his troops shot the nose of the Sphinx off. That never actually happened. All right, now, but the Rosetta Stone's a massive discovery, and he's very, very high on himself right now, but the British see what this little guy is doing. Oh, man, what did I just say? Why did I call him that? Oh, wait, because the British called him that, right? They called him like Little Bonaparte or the Little General, and they would make fun of him a lot. And a lot of historians believe the British Navy had a right to make fun of him because they destroyed him every time they got into battle with him in a big way, right? The British Royal Navy engages Napoleon at this thing called the Battle of the Nile, right? And at the Battle of the Nile, he suffers his first major defeat as a general, right? And he suffers it at the hands of this man, Admiral Horatio Nelson, right? Admiral Horatio Nelson was a rear admiral in the British Royal Navy, right? He was their main leader in their naval force, and he is the one man that Napoleon just could never beat, right? He could just never beat Admiral Horatio Nelson for some reason or another. Now, I love historic military figures, and I love their big rivalries with one another. I love how Alexander hated Darius III so much that he actually crucified the man that killed him before he got a chance to, right? Like, so I love figures like Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant squaring off against each other. I love these guys, and I love the rivalry between Napoleon and Admiral Horatio Nelson. And I also love Admiral Horatio Nelson just as a complete figure. Admiral Horatio Nelson is the strongest man, one of the strongest men in history, if you ask me. He was a brilliant tactician, a brilliant use of Royal Navy power, but he also was a brilliant use of toughness, right? So at the Battle of the Nile, he actually was injured on his face and lost all of the vision in one of his eyes, right? And he actually couldn't see, so he was half blind. During this battle, when he was injured in his eye, he kept fighting, right? Same thing as well, that journals revealed apparently accounts the fact that when a bomb went off, it injured one of his arms gruesomely during another battle that he actually was engaged in during this time period, possibly against the French as well. And when this happened, they had to cut his arm off, but he still kept fighting with an injured arm, right? And so, as you can see, the sleeve right here is completely empty. If you ask me later on Monday, I'll tell you what finally got Admiral Nelson's goat. But, like, he's the guy that Napoleon could just he could just never beat, right? So once Napoleon loses at the Battle of the Nile to Admiral Horatio Nelson, and he's forced to return all the way back to France defeated, when he returns a hero. And people are like, everybody's like, well, wait a minute. He just, what? I know where you're getting at, Shannon, and I agree with you. That's a great question. Why is he returning a hero if he just lost a major battle and he wasn't successful in actually taking Egypt from the British? The thing about it is, he may have lost that battle, but the people back in France, they didn't know he lost that battle yet because he abandoned his entire army. This is one of Napoleon's softest moments, right? He abandoned an entire French army in Egypt and just left and went back to France after he was defeated at the Battle of the Nile, right? So the engagements in Egypt went on for like several more years, but he just abandoned the army altogether. He's like, I can't win here, and just leaves, right? The French people didn't know that, so they only heard about his military successes in Egypt, outside of Syria and parts of like the Suez Basin, right? So the biggest thing about it is, Admiral Nelson, and then he's going to seize upon this popularity, and he's like, what we're going to do? We're going to do a good old-fashioned coup d'etat, right? So a coup d'etat is a sudden seizure or an overthrow of a ruling body, usually by force, usually in an extreme way, and usually using the military as your backing, right? So what ends up happening is he uses his military to orchestrate this coup d'etat and overthrow the extremely weak and corrupt directory, right? Now, the directory, ironically enough, was so corrupt that 2 directors helped him overthrow their own organization, right? Which I find to be absolutely hilarious. All right, so now these 2 directors that actually did this would later on be double-crossed by Napoleon, though, because he's Napoleon, right? So now Napoleon is victorious in seizing control of France, and he establishes his new system, known as the consulate system, right? A 3-man executive branch known as his consulate system. Now, some of you are like, wait a minute, I've heard this word consul before. Of course you've heard this word consul before, because we've talked about Caesar 1,000 times, and Caesar was elected consul. Remember, Bibulus was like, don't listen to Caesar, and he got the poop bucket. Lauren, nice. All right, so now the biggest thing about it, though, is he's modeling his ascension to power much like Caesar, a successful dictator, a coup d'etat, a sudden overthrow, and getting after it, right? Now, ironically enough, the men that helped him establish this consulate system were the first and second consuls, or not the first and second, the second and the third consul, because Napoleon rewrote the Constitution and named himself first consul, as in the most important consul, much like the Caesars did as well, like Augustus did when he was actually ruling over Rome, and many of the ones that followed after him. Man, my hair is jacked up. All right, so anyway, now, so as we can see, he's pulling major Caesar vibes, and big question, why would the people of France, who got rid of Louis XVI, now support Napoleon, who's growing into being an absolute leader? Well, the biggest reason why is because they would rather have peace and order than bloodshed and uncertainty, right? Like, this idea that Napoleon offers order is very important, and he also offers the glory of France, right? And the way he wants to originally show off this glory of France is in this set of wars that he begins to fight, known as the Napoleonic Wars, right? Or the Wars of the Coalitions, okay? So following Napoleon's claim to power when he named himself first consul, right, in 1799, he begins to fight an endless amount of wars. Now, some of these, he's not picking these battles on his own. They're being picked at him, right? These coalitions keep rising up and trying to fight revolutionary France, and Napoleon just keeps smacking them down, right? Now, he began to fight an endless amount of wars, effectively taking over actually most of Europe going into this point. The Third Coalition War, he wins. The Second Coalition War, he wins. The Fourth Coalition War, he wins, right? And in these things become known as the Napoleonic Wars because every time he would win them, he would take over a new chunk of Europe, right? And he just kept growing and growing and growing. He went to Spain, he takes over Spain. He went to the Holy Roman Empire. Write this down. He killed the Holy Roman Empire, right? Napoleon is the death toll for the Holy Roman Empire. Because like Voltaire said, it was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire, and he's the one that comes in and crushes it completely when it was on its last leg, right? I think it was Francis II the Holy Roman Emperor Francis II, who would eventually become Francis VI of Austria, was the one that like kind of booga booga booga, you can't touch me, and Napoleon comes in there and he destroys the Holy Roman Empire, and Francis leaves, abdicates, becomes King of Austria. And when Napoleon takes it over, he calls it his Confederation of the Rhine, right? So now instead of actually calling it the Holy Roman Empire, because he's like, this belongs to me now, right? So he defeats these armies, though, that are coalition armies. They're groups of allied countries that have come together to destroy him and what he's doing, and they just can't stop him. He just keeps going through over and over and over and over again. At the Battle of Austerlitz, he wins. At the Battle of Leipzig, he wins, right? Like at these major things that he did, and it was all because he was a genius strategist. Maybe he wasn't the best naval guy ever, because one point during the Napoleonic Wars, during the War of the Third Coalition, he tried to directly invade Europe using his naval fleet, but guess what guy was waiting for him right off the coast and destroyed his entire navy? Of course, Admiral Horatio Nelson, but only, unfortunately, at that Third Coalition War, Admiral Horatio Nelson dies, right? Now, in 1804, Napoleon crowns himself emperor, right? And he did this at one point, apparently, by grabbing and ripping the crown out of the Pope's hands during the ceremony and crowning himself with it to try and show that he has more power than the Pope, that he is above the Pope, right? So Pope crown Napoleon. It's a very, very famous painting because you can actually see, where is he at? You can actually see him in the background. Oh, man, it's too pixelated. Come on, there it is. This is Napoleon right here. He ripped the crown out of the Pope's hand, crowned himself, and then he proceeded to crown his wife, Josephine, right? Now, his wife, Josephine, was his first wife, actually, and was going to be like the queen underneath the new emperor of France. But unfortunately, they end up getting a divorce due to the fact that she can't bear him a son, right? And apparently, don't write this, 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 don't write this. All right, so the only thing, you don't need to write it at all. It's just a good story. But at dinner one evening on November 30th in 1809, following all these Napoleonic Wars, he let his wife Josephine know that in the interest of France, he has to find a new wife. And so he divorces his wife to produce a son, and Josephine was devastated, but they were still soon divorced. And apparently a lot of historians say that he never got over her, that he always was in love with her, right? And apparently it was one of the last things he was like, give it to Josephine on his deathbed, right? So, and on March 11th, 1810, Napoleon married the 19-year-old Marie Louise, an Austrian princess who would give birth to their son, Napoleon II. All right, so this proved to be a very wise move because this would ally him with Austria, right? Now, this really quickly, though, are all of Napoleon's biggest accomplishments, right? So this is going to be the last little bit for this flip this weekend. Let me make myself a little bit smaller. There we go. And Napoleon had a massive amount of accomplishments, right? He built the largest empire in Europe since Rome, right? Let me text my wife real quick. Better know that I'm on my way in a second. I'm on my way in a sec. Gotta finish a flip. All right, so he had built the largest empire in Europe that Rome had ever seen. Like, look at this bad boy. That's the grand empire that he built. Every time he would win a war, he would adopt a new piece, right? Largest empire that anybody had ever seen since Rome. He pushed forward the liberal ideas of the French Revolution, right? He set up a fair tax code. He sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States in 1803 for $15 million because he got it for free, because when he took over Spain, he ended up getting all the things that they owned, so he just sold it away to make more money to fight more wars, right? He set up a fair tax code that made it so everyone had to pay taxes. No one was immune from them, right? He let Haiti go, which was a slave colony. Of course, he tried to reinstate slavery for a hot second, but he did eventually let it go, right? He hires government officials based on merit, not on nepotism. If you worked hard, you could move up through his system. He created the very first public schools called the lycée systems, right? He restored Catholicism in France, but he also created freedom of religion, right? And he also created the Napoleonic Code, which was a set of laws that he created, right? And we're going to start off with that Napoleonic Code tomorrow, or on Monday. I'll talk to you guys then, and then we're going to get into Napoleon's biggest mistakes. We'll wrap up the Napoleonic phase of the revolution, but I'll see you guys then. Y'all have a fantastic weekend. Looking forward to it.